While retirement is generally seen as a time of relaxation and self-focus, God calls us to love, serve, and help others for a lifetime. He has been preparing us for this retirement season, literally our entire lives. In retirement, countless Christians enter a state of spiritual dormancy, not knowing how they are called to have an impact for God's kingdom. The Retirement Reformation seeks to encourage and empower the 50 million Christians approaching or in retirement to embrace the calling God has been preparing in them. When the world says it's time to stop, you can begin to have your greatest impact. Welcome to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation, where our goal is to journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him.
Reaching out to the 50 million Christ followers in America who are approaching or in retirement to embrace the very calling that God has been preparing for you all of your life. You've tuned into iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation. We are your hosts, Jim and Martha Brangenberg, along with Bruce Bruinsma, the founder of the Retirement Reformation. Check us out online, retirementreformation.org. While retirement is generally seen as a time of relaxation and self-focus, God calls us to remain faithful to love, serve, and help others. Countless Christians, millions, are entering a state of spiritual dormancy that we have to stop. We've got to help all of you to prepare for and step into your retirement years with intentionality. We want to help you see what God has in store for you. Your retirement years can be your best ministry season of your entire life as you take advantage of a lifetime's worth of knowledge and experience, combined with a greater freedom of time and money, and invest all of this into the upcoming generations. It's not retirement as usual. It's the Retirement Reformation. When you start charting your course for these 30-plus years ahead of you, it can be a bit daunting. So Bruce Bruinsma joins us today to share some insights from the inside of his latest book, Charting Your Course, Planning Your Next 30 Decades. How about 3 decades? It could be 30, you don't know. Bruce, welcome back to iRetire4Him.
Jim and Martha, it's good to be with you and to be able to address this really critical topic and to do it in a way that can be encouraging as well as informative, to give people a pathway to be able to see what God already has planned for them and to be able to connect with that pathway.
You know, that's such a great perspective, because it's one thing to have somebody say, hey, there's all these problems, but to do some encouragement and give them some resources to do that. And charting your course is just one of those ways that we can do that. So Bruce, why are you so passionate about walking alongside Christ-following retirees?
Well, you know, you use the word passion. Mm-hmm. And I think part of the discovering your course, or charting your course, is discovering what it is that you are passionate about. So how do you even find out what it is you're passionate about? Well, a friend of mine gave me just a really quick, easy way to do that. He said, when you're reading a book, looking at a magazine, watching a movie, watching a TV show, and you choke up and tears come, that's what you're passionate about. And so a very emotional, because that's where our energy comes, that's where we get our why to be able to move forward. So God has put me passionate about this topic.
And that's fantastic. So let's continue forward in your book, because we talked about a couple of chapters already. Let's move forward. What exactly is retirement planning?
We have in our society, the word retirement has almost been captured and confined to talking about financial issues. Typically, you talk about a retirement plan, you're talking about a financial plan. And so retirement planning is planning the financial side of your existence for the next 30 years. Understanding, and it's important to understand, that it only then becomes the platform upon which all of the exciting activities that God has planned for you and the ways that you can make a difference evolve from. So that is retirement planning. So I'm going to anticipate a question you're going to ask me.
I'm not going to ask it now.
That one is, we talk about in the book, the difference between retirement planning and life planning. Mm-hmm. Those are quite different. And my recommendation in the book, and from what I've seen in working with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, is that what you really need to start with is the life planning. and then the retirement planning. Life planning asks this question: who am I? Where am I? Where am I going? And how am I going to get there?
But why would you start with all that stuff when if you don't have any money, those questions get to be really hard to ask?
The resources that you will need in order to respond to God's plan, call on your life, he already knows what they are, and he will provide them when you are in his will, walking in his path, and doing the work of life planning and then the retirement planning that comes with it. Could you start on the other side? Yes, you could. Unfortunately, most people don't start on the other side, or if they do, they don't then move to the life planning stage, which is so very critical.
You know, and I'm very intrigued by this idea because I know, Jim, that we have found ourselves in different stages of life with, young married, with kids growing up, and there were times where I said, man, I wish we would have sat down and anticipated more what was coming. I mean, yes, we know the kids will get older. I mean, that's just kind of a given,
They do get older.
They do get older. And, some people act like surprised. Oh, my goodness, graduation's coming. That means what's next? And they've not sat down and talked about that. And really, that's this conversation to the end of life. I mean, the whole life. Let's talk about what kinds of questions do you ask to help people in that life planning?
Interestingly enough, one of the most contentious questions that come out of that is when you and your spouse are out for a walk at night, and let's say you're 55, 60, 65, or could be much older, and you turn to your spouse and you say, we're at a time in our lives when things are going to change. Where shall we live? The question isn't about money. The question isn't about any of the bigger things of life, but where are we? Are we going to live by the ocean? Or are we going to live by the mountains? Are we going to live by our kids? Are we going to live far away from our kids? Are we going to live overseas for a while? Are we going to go on a mission? What are we going to do with that part of our life? And it is the most contentious issues between couples that we see. So I would urge you, if you're listening to when you're listening to this, go for a walk with your spouse in the next 3 days and just ask that question. Where are we going to live next?
Bruce, when you've met with thousands of couples over your years as a financial planner, and as you have sat down with them, how many of them are actually, and you only get 30 seconds to answer this question, how many of them are actually asking these tough questions, not just how do we save, but how do we live?
Very few. Very few. If I had to put a percentage on it, I'd go, 5 to 7. And so the need is huge. That's why the message is so important. Please hear us.
Wow, that's a monstrous thing. So we're heading towards a break. I want to invite you to check out our website, retirementreformation.org. Out there, you're going to see Bruce's blog. You're going to get access to his books that you can download or you can buy. You're going to get access to all kinds of materials. But also, if you want to get a chance at getting a paperback copy of the Retirement Reformation sent to you, go to the contact page, put in your information, and share with us your retirement story, your I Retire for Him story. You're listening to I Retire for Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation, with your host, Jim and Martha Brangenberg, and the founder, Bruce Bruinsma. We'll be right back.
There is a move of God in our country called the Retirement Reformation. It's not enough to sit in the grandstands of life, watching the days go by with leisure as a reward. Join us back on the playing field of life, discovering God's plan for you and building purpose and intentionality into every day. Go to retirementreformation.org and click on the Resources tab. Check out our prayer walk and start ministering to your neighbors through prayer today. Connect with your ongoing journey by downloading the prayer app at retirementreformation.org. Click on the Resources tab. Make the journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him. Now let's get back to the show.
Hey, welcome back to I Retire for Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation, with your host, Jim and Martha Brangenberg, and the founder of the Retirement Reformation, Bruce Bruinsma. Bruce, you've got a guest that you have joining us today.
I do. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Martha. Char, we're so pleased to have you on the program today, and I'd like to introduce Char Kellogg to our audience. So just to start us off and to give you an easy one to start with, Char, please just tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll delve into how God is using you today.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. My name, as he said, is Char Kellogg, and I live in Northern California in a small coastal town called Eureka. I met my husband, Mike, in college, and we've been married for 54 years. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and I always knew about God. My parents made sure of that, but I didn't come to actually know him until I was about 13 years old. I worked outside the home before our children were born. I volunteered for several community organizations as well as religious organizations in my church. And actually, since that time, which was years ago, retirement has not been a part of my vocabulary. I guess I've just kept on doing what I feel God is calling me to do next. I currently serve in Stonecroft Ministries, whose mission is to see women reconciled to God through Jesus Christ, as well as in my church, where I serve in a voluntary staff position of Community Outreach Director. So as you can see, both positions are kind of along the same line.
Well, Char, we're so glad that God is using you and that you've responded in those ways and for such a long time. What a blessing that is. Yeah. When we spoke earlier, you indicated that you were basically an introvert. And so that just really interested me. And how is it then that relationship, outreach, evangelism, is your kingdom-building activity in the different roles that you play? How does God take an introvert and use her in such an extroverted kind of way?
Well, I think he's done it very slowly because I've gotten very old. And so he has used it one step at a time. He never told me at the beginning I would be doing this, and I never would have dreamed it. But it's been a lot of people mentoring me, people being an example to me, and it's kind of like they would say, if I can do it, you can do it too, and just that encouragement. It's not throwing me out there where I do not feel comfortable and have not been trained, but slowly but surely. And as I did that, God showed me. I saw neighbors come to know him just by being able to invite them to an event where the gospel was shared and they were given the opportunity. And so once I saw results, that was the impetus I needed to continue. It was God's work, not mine.
What a wonderful model and what a wonderful example. And there are so many of our listeners, I'm sure, and so many of our Christian brothers and sisters that need that encouragement and then their willingness to be able to respond and to be able to continue to walk in the ways of building the kingdom. So just a question, you mentioned that you've never really quote unquote retired and it's been an evolution, but just over the years, maybe over the last 10 or 15 years, has your view of what it means to be older changed at all, or has it always been the way that you think about it now?
Actually, I would say in maybe the last 5 years, once you get over 70, you realize that you're changing.
Yes.
And that you are getting older. And so I try to keep things that are valuable in my life. I try to keep involved in things that are beyond my household, so to speak. I try to see people more, I think, and listen to people better and connect with people in a better way.
That
makes sense.
It sure does. One of the wonderful things about growing older is the fact that we can grow spiritually, we can grow emotionally, and that gives us the capacity to be able to do the things that you're talking about. So that's a real encouragement to those of us that have moved over that 70 age, and I should be an encouragement to those that are in their 40s and 50s knowing what's coming. So, Char, let me just ask you one last question. Are there any other kind of lessons that you have learned, and as you've seen God's plan for you, that would be an encouragement to our listeners. What you've said has already been encouraging, but is there anything else that the Holy Spirit puts on your mind that you can share?
I think one of the things is I've done a lot of testing, as to who I am and what my spiritual gifts are. And one of my spiritual gifts is faith, and I would never, ever have, it's not my top, it's my third. But I would have never dreamed that until I read a description by Eugene Peterson. And he said that faith is a long obedience in the same direction. And as I look back on my life, I think that is what God has enabled me to do, to be an influence, to trust him and let him do the work. One of the highlights for me this past year was when a friend told me that she says, this is kind of funny, but I actually find myself thinking like you do. And that excited me so much because she was talking about praying for her neighbors. She was talking about really caring that people came to know Jesus. And I can't think of a better way I would have liked to have spent my life. And I will continue to do this as long as God has me here.
Well, our prayer is that you will have an extended time. We know that 90, 95, 100, even 104 is
well, my father lived to be 100, so that's possible.
There we go. We have got it. So, Char, thank you so much.
Hey, Char, I got a question for you before you go. Would that be all right, Bruce?
Sure, go ahead,
So,
Jim.
Char, do you have kids and grandkids?
I do not have grandchildren.
Okay.
We had 2 children. We lost our daughter 22 years ago in a plane crash, and so our son is not married or doesn't have any children. So therefore, I do have more time than a lot of grandparents do.
So how are you helping your son prepare for this whole retirement paradigm shift where retirement's not really a permission to check out, but that God's got purpose for you in your retirement years?
How am I helping him prepare for that?
Yeah, from learning from you.
I'm hoping he sees something in me. My son is not currently walking with the Lord that I know of, so I'm not so sure he's thinking in that same way, but I haven't given up.
Amen to that. And, Char, one of the things I hear you saying is that the things that you're filling your time with during the day is really filling into other people with those same values that you've been sharing with us today. So the future generations are going to learn from you. How you're filling your time is such a great example. So thank you for doing that.
You're a wonderful example of the thinking, of the messaging of the Retirement Reformation. Mm-hmm. And so when you talked about the assessment that you took and so on, it reminds me of the process went through in writing the book, Charting Your Course, that helps people to address those kinds of issues as they move on.
Yeah.
So, Char, thank you so much for your time, and I'll look forward to our next conversation on a personal basis, and may we just encourage you and know that we will pray for your son.
All right. Thank you very much.
And I want you to plug that ministry you're involved in one more time.
It's Stonecroft Ministries.
And where's that found online?
It's stonecroftministries.org.
Very good. Char, thank you very much. We'll be right back with more of I Retire for Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation. Hang on.
You've spent decades making financial plans for your retirement years. But have you done any life planning? God has a plan for your life, and it includes living out your faith in your retirement years with meaning, purpose, and intentionality. Go out to retirementreformation.org and click on our Resources tab. Download a copy of the book, Charting Your Course, and get started with life planning today. Simply download a copy of Charting Your Course at retirementreformation.org. Make the journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him. Now let's get back to the show.
Hey, welcome back to I Retire for Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation. Hope you enjoyed that story as much as we did. Bruce, we love it when you bring on your friends to share their stories. Why don't you just share, I didn't tell you I was going to ask this question, but why don't you just share, you're not 60 anymore. And so you've been working on this whole retirement thing, yet you just are entering into quote-unquote retirement, even though you're really not. Talk about how you and Judy have just recently, how you're talk about this intentionally. You're talking about making life choices. What's one of those life choices that you guys have made as you head into retirement together?
Well, as we move in from one stage of retirement to the other, and there are actually 3 stages of retirement, and so as we move into the second and perhaps at the beginning of the 3rd stage, we realize that there's a couple of things that do happen, and let's just be really clear. You do go downhill physically, and you do go downhill mentally. That is absolutely true. Now, there are countervailing balances to that, is that you can grow spiritually and you can grow emotionally. It means that you can speak into the difficult issues of life, and between the two of us, we can address those difficult issues of life, whether they be family or circumstance. So Judy and I decided that the house that we built 7 years ago, we want to stay there. We realized that I'm 79, Judy's 80, that, over the next 10 years, there will be some challenges. So how are we going to do that? So we realized that God had provided a resource for us. The resource is called the lower level of our home, which is absolutely beautiful, but we never went down there. And so now we have found God sent us just the most wonderful couple to be able to have a residence, because they had not prepared for retirement.
Well, and they've been missionaries.
They had not prepared for retirement, and they have the heart, the desire, the skill set. They are excited about living with us. We are excited about them living with us, and we believe now that we have the freedom to be able to look forward and to be able to stay in our home until God calls us home.
Yeah,
so really, you had a proactive conversation, and I think that goes back to this whole life plan and saying, what are we going to do that can make it so that we can do this? And again, we're not talking about necessarily finances, but here's our situation. How can we allow that to happen? And coming to a great agreement that, is working out well for you, but it took some thinking. It wasn't a knee-jerk reaction at all, which you could easily have to do if one of you had broken a leg or a hip or something like that. So I love the intentionality of that conversation.
I think your word intentionality is really important when we talk about life planning, of identifying the issues, being able to pray and think through them, to seek advice, read a book, talk to an expert, talk to somebody who's been through it, and then be able to take next steps. And I think within our churches, we have a huge opportunity for those dialogues to take place. I'm afraid not very many of them are taking place, and that's a subject for another podcast. But to be able to be intentional, and then to be able to have the passion, to be able to have the energy to take the steps to move from thought to action to reality.
Let's talk about one of those issues. I loved in chapter 3, I think it was in your book, you hit the nuclear button on this issue, because this is the one I've heard about the most, where you get a couple, they've been married for 45 years, they've been working apart for 45 years, and all of a sudden they're going to spend 24/7, 365 with each other, and they don't have a plan. And I can't tell you how many times I've talked to my neighbors, because we've lived in Florida almost 20 years, and people go like, well, some days we just don't like spending time together. I mean, how do you help couples deal with the fact that this is going to be different? How do you get them to learn to live together again?
Actually, I think this starts back from the beginning of marriage, and an understanding that the family is you and your spouse. That's the family. God brings children into that family, and your role is to prepare them to leave and be their own family. Therefore, what's left is your family. And unfortunately, that gets very confusing for both men and women in different circumstances.
It's an ongoing paradigm shift. It's one that never stops.
Exactly. So now, what is the most important part of the relationship that you have with your spouse? They better be a friend.
Well, I don't know why you would marry anybody but a friend anyway. I mean, Martha and I always say, we married our best friend. So we can't imagine not spending time together.
Unfortunately, within the Christian community, as we know, that the divorce rate is not dissimilar.
Yeah.
than it is in the regular world, and what a shame. And I think part of it is that lack of understanding of those roles and that responsibility. In another podcast, and I talk about it in the book, there's money personalities that you can learn about how to work together financially.
Yep.
There's a whole series of different kinds of assessments that you can learn to understand each other and know how much time you need to spend together, and then perhaps how much time you need to spend apart. And to be very, very intentional about that and not surprised by the issue. There's the point. You don't need to be surprised by the issue, and there is lots of help available and perspective that will make a difference, because when that thing goes nuclear, we're seeing, Jim, it's really sad, but we're seeing a tremendous increase in gray divorce, gray bankruptcy, gray, all the different issues of our times are all being reflected in that. And those are really challenging issues that we need to speak into, and within the church, we need to be able to get our arms around and support and change the way that people are thinking and acting.
So you referred to your book, and it's called Charting Your Course, Discovering Direction for Your Future Funded Ministry. And Bruce, I think one of the great things is that you're giving some very practical application, because a lot of people don't make those plans, and they don't think about what's it going to be like when one of us is home or both of us is home all of the time. But I love that you didn't just, again, say, here's a problem. You gave some solutions, and you're giving some tools that people can find. So listeners, go to retirementreformation.org, and there you can learn more, get yourself a copy of this book, and start working on it now so that you don't have those nuclear disasters happen, because
You learn how to spend time together today.
Exactly.
Let's get working
Find
on
a
this.
hobby, whatever that might be. Learn more about each other, because work kept us apart. If you're working outside of the home and you have separate lifestyles, you got to start bringing that back together. So those resources being in the book is amazing. Charting Your Course.
Check it out online, retirementreformation.org, retirementreformation.org. You've been listening to I Retire for Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation, with your host, Jim and Martha Brangenberg, and founder, Bruce Bruinsma. We're Christ followers pursuing purpose in our retirement, so ultimately, I retire for Him.
Thanks for listening to I Retire for Him with your hosts Jim and Martha Brangenberg and Retirement Reformation founder Bruce Bruinsma. I Retire for Him is the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation. Most Christians tend to follow the world's pattern of rest and self-pampering during retirement. However, in your retirement, you can be focused on God's unique call to love, serve, and help others. This can be your best season of life if you take advantage of a life's worth of knowledge and experience and combine it with a greater freedom of time and money, and invest it all in the generations both preceding and following you. The Retirement Reformation is encouraging Christians to find and follow God's call in all seasons and aspects of life, especially in retirement. Take time to sign the manifesto at retirementreformation.org and explore the wealth of resources available on our site. Join this movement of God and journey from retirement to reformation, so you can say, I retire for Him. Go to retirementreformation.org.